Yes. Okay, here we go. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters, meaning Pilate. It was early morning. There, probably like 5:30 in the morning, and they themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." That was because of Rome. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate pronounces him innocent for the first time, right? And it's not the last time that he's going to say Jesus is innocent. Pilate said to him, so this is he's talking with Jesus, and Jesus has just said, "Everyone who believes in me is on the side of truth." And so Pilate. What is truth? He had said this. When he had said that. After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" So, and the people cried out, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a robber. So the mob chooses Barabbas over Jesus. And Barabbas actually was a criminal, right? And Jesus was innocent. But they released Barabbas. And then the Romans scourge Jesus, and we talked about that yesterday, about this flagellum, which is a type of whip that has like multiple.
Is it called that?
What?
Isn't it called like the nine-tailed cat?
That's some people call it that, yes, but that's flagellum. This is the other one. So anyway, all these jagged things and protruding sharp things, and then the thongs themselves are probably. I knew you were going to do that. I knew that's what they're called. They're made of leather, so they were sturdy. And the person was flogged until they were nearly dead. And those things, that those protrusions would go into the flesh and catch in the flesh, and when it would come back out, the flesh would be just decimated. And by the end, their back, the person's back, was like in tears and tatters all over. It was a horrible, horrible thing. So the Romans place a crown of thorns on him and ridicule him. So they were humiliating him with the short robe and the crown, and striking him in the head and hitting them from behind and saying, "Who hit you? Who like prophesy, Jesus, who hit you?" And they ridiculed him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. Then they came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him. So once again, this is the second time. Pilate says he's innocent, right? So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So Pilate turns him over to the Jews for crucifixion, even though he knows that Jesus is innocent. When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God," which is either true or it's blasphemy, and that's what they're saying. He has committed blasphemy. Now, a Roman official like Pilate wouldn't have cared about that because he wasn't a Jew, right? And so he didn't realize that that would get Jesus killed. But the Jews used it with him. So so when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above, from God. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." So here's Pilate, who everybody crumbles in front of and is afraid of, and Jesus isn't afraid of him. And in fact, it sounds a little bit like Pilate is afraid of Jesus here. And well, he should be. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, because he was not really very popular with the Romans, and when he heard, "Oh, I'm going to get in trouble again," that's the reason why he had him crucified. Pilate didn't want to get in trouble again. So, so when he heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat in the place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. And now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, so about noon. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, these are the leaders, "We have no king but Caesar." God, maybe? The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to be crucified. Crucifixion is the most painful and agonizing death. That's the reason the Romans devised it. They wanted to devise the worst way to die. And it took a long time to die. In fact, Jesus was on the cross for about 3 hours, and they were surprised he died that quickly. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross. That was common. That was what people did. To the place called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic and in Latin and in Greek. By the way, that's an eyewitness detail. If you're going to lie, you don't give details because you can get tripped up. And that's an eyewitness detail that it was written in 3 languages. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier. Also his tunic, but the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be." This was to fulfill what the scripture says. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So that's an Old Testament an Old Testament prophecy of Messiah. And here it is. So the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, who is that? John, who is writing this. "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his home. So she's taking care of his mother. Take care of my mother, John, is what he's saying. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A jar full of sour wine stood there. So they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch, and he held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the day of preparation just before the Passover, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, was the first day of Passover. The Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the only way you could breathe on the cross was to get a breath. You had to push up on the nails in your feet to grab a breath. And the crucifixion, people that were crucified didn't die by their wounds. They died by asphyxiation. They could no longer take in any air. And that's part of the reason why it takes so long. And they were surprised that it didn't that it didn't take long. So so when Jesus uh, so they didn't break his legs. That's also prophecy. Since that none of his bones would be broken. And so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. The Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. Now it wasn't blood and water, it was red blood cells and white blood cells. But that is one of the first signs of death. They told us with my father and with my mother that when you see red circles on their legs, it's really close. So that means he was dead. They knew he was dead. Okay, we'll stop there.